I never thought I'd become the kind of man who drives 4 hours in the middle of the night with a length of chain in his truck bed and cold calculation in his chest. But here's what I've learned about fathers. We don't know what we're capable of until the moment someone hurts our child. And by then, it's too late to choose differently. My name is Thibeault. I'm a long-haul freight driver out of Sudbury, Ontario. 18-wheelers, mostly auto parts and dry goods across the Trans-Canada corridor. It's not glamorous work. You're away from home 3 weeks at a stretch, sometimes longer if weather closes the highway through the saw. My wife Elise and I divorced when our daughter Maisie was 6. Maisie's 11 now. She has her mother's red hair and my stubbornness, which I've been told is a terrible combination. She collects National Geographic magazines and keeps them in alphabetical order by the feature article. She has a gray tabby cat named Mr. Pickles that she rescued from behind the Tim Hortons on Paris Street. Elise remarried 2 years ago, a man named Brody Vance. Brody manages a CrossFit gym in Lively and has one of those YouTube channels where he films himself doing pull-ups and talking about discipline. He's 34, which puts him 6 years younger than Elise and 12 years younger than me. I didn't like him from the first time I shook his hand. His grip was the kind of firm that's performing, not genuine, and he never looked Maisie in the eyes when he spoke to her. He addressed everything to Elise, like Maisie was furniture that came with the house. I told myself I was being territorial. I told myself to stay in my lane. That was my first mistake. It was supposed to be Elise's week with Maisie. I was on a run from Sudbury to Thunder Bay, pulling a refrigerated trailer for a grocery chain. Should have been gone until Friday. But there was a jackknifed semi on the 17 just past White River, took out 3 lanes and a guardrail, and Transport Canada shut the corridor down for 18 hours while they cleared it. My dispatcher rerouted me back to the depot Tuesday afternoon. I was home by 5:30 p.m., which never happens on a Tuesday. I called Elise to ask if I could swing by and see Maisie for an hour before dinner. She didn't answer. I called twice more. Nothing. I figured she was at the gym or in the shower, so I drove over anyway. Elise lives 20 minutes from my apartment, on a quiet street in the Minnow Lake area. Good neighborhood, big backyards. When I pulled up, her car was in the driveway. Brody's truck was there too. I knocked on the front door, no answer. I knocked again and called out through the mail slot. Nothing. The house felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain, like the silence was the wrong kind of silence. I walked around to the side of the house, following the fence line to the backyard gate. I called out again, and that's when I heard it. Maisie's voice, muffled, thin, coming from the storage shed behind the garage. I don't know what happened inside me in that moment. Something shifted, something that can't shift back. I crossed the yard in about 4 strides and pressed my hand flat against the shed door. It was one of those metal prefab units, maybe 3 meters by 2, the kind you buy at Rona to store a lawnmower and some garden chemicals. The door was held shut with a combination padlock, the same style Elise uses for her gym locker. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Maisie, I'm right here. Are you hurt?" The silence before she answered felt like it lasted an hour. "I don't know. I've been here for a really long time." The padlock broke on the second swing of the snow shovel I found leaning against the garage. The door swung outward and the smell reached me before my eyes adjusted to the darkness inside. Urine. Rust. The flat, sour smell of a child who has been afraid for a very long time in a very small space. She was in the back corner, knees pulled to her chest, sitting on the bare plywood floor. She had a thin fleece blanket around her shoulders. September in Sudbury gets cold at night, even early September, and her socks were wet. There was a plastic bucket near the door that she'd been using as a toilet. There was no water, no food. Just Maisie in the dark on a Tuesday evening in a metal box in the backyard. I got her out and held her, and I didn't say anything for a while because there are moments where words are the wrong tool entirely. "How long?" I finally said. I needed to know, and I was terrified to know. She thought about it. "Since Sunday," she said. "After supper, I checked my phone. It was Tuesday. 43 hours. The story came out in pieces, the way children tell terrible things, not in one coherent narrative but in fragments, circling back, getting stuck on details that seem small and aren't. Brody had told Maisie to clear the dinner table. She'd been slow about it because she was watching something on her tablet. He'd told her she was disrespectful and lazy. She'd said she was almost done. He'd said that children who act like animals live like animals, and before she understood what was happening, she was in the shed, with the door locked behind her. She told me she knocked until her knuckles bled. She told me she called for her mother. She said Elise had come outside once, on Sunday night, and stood outside the door and said that Brody knew best and that Maisie needed to learn. That detail, Elise standing outside the door and walking away, I've never been able to shake that one. Mr. Pickles, Maisie said against my chest. She'd started to shiver even though it wasn't cold in the backyard. He's in the basement. Brody locked him down there when he locked me in here. He said the cat was annoying. I carried Maisie inside through the back door, which wasn't locked. Elise was asleep on the couch, half a bottle of Pinot Grigio on the coffee table, her phone on her chest. She woke up when I came in, saw my face, saw Maisie, and went a color I don't have a name for. Before she could say a word, I told her to call 911. My voice was very quiet and very flat, which is what happens to me when I'm past a certain point. She started to say something about how Brody had said a few days wouldn't. I told her to call 911 or I would. Brody came down the stairs in a Lululemon shirt, looking irritated. When he saw me, he stopped on the landing and put on a smile that didn't reach anything above his jaw. He started to say something about my custody rights and my right to be in his home. I looked at Maisie, and I looked at Brody, and I looked at my hands, and I put Maisie down gently in an armchair, and I walked to the kitchen, and I called 911 myself. The police arrived in 11 minutes. Paramedics came 4 minutes after that. Maisie was taken to Health Sciences North for assessment, and I rode with her in the ambulance and held her hand and told her about Mr. Pickles, and what a tough old cat he was, and how he was going to be absolutely fine, which I didn't actually know. At the hospital, they treated her for mild dehydration and exposure. The overnight temperature Sunday had dropped to 7 degrees Celsius, and the shed had no insulation. There were abrasions on her knuckles consistent with striking a metal surface repeatedly. The attending pediatrician who examined her came to find me in the hallway afterward, and he put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything for a moment, which told me everything I needed to know about what the chart said. 2 officers stayed behind at the house. Brody was detained for questioning. Elise was also questioned. I know because a child protection worker from the Sudbury district office called me at the hospital that same evening to tell me that they were opening an investigation and that Maisie would be placed in my care pending its outcome. Brody was charged 2 days later. Child endangerment, criminal negligence causing bodily harm. The Crown Attorney's Office assigned a prosecutor I'll call Ms. Beaumont, who was competent and thorough and explained everything in plain language. She said the case was strong. She said these cases take time. The bail hearing was 4 days after the arrest. Brody's parents drove up from Barrie. His defense lawyer was a man in an expensive suit who talked a great deal about Brody's community ties and his YouTube subscribers and his lack of any prior record. The judge set bail at $40,000 and a list of conditions. He was not to contact Maisie or approach within 500 meters of her school or my residence. He was free to return to his home, his gym, his life, and his channel. I sat in that courtroom and watched him walk out smiling at his lawyer, and I thought about Maisie in the back corner of that shed, knocking on metal until her hands bled. And I understood something about myself that I'd never needed to understand before. I went home. I made Maisie scrambled eggs and toast because that was what she asked for. I sat with her until she fell asleep. Then I sat in my kitchen and I stared at the wall for a long time, and I made a decision that I'm not asking anyone to endorse. I spent the next 10 days learning Brody's schedule. He was back at his gym 2 days after the bail hearing. The gym was his, technically incorporated under his company name, so the bail conditions didn't require him to stay away from it. He uploaded a new video the day after the hearing, a pull-up variation he'd developed. The caption said something about resilience and discipline. He left the gym most weeknights around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, after the last class cleared out. He drove a black Ram 1500, parked in the same spot in the lot behind the building every night, creature of habit. He walked to his truck alone because the gym's evening staff left before him. My buddy Ronnie owns a landscaping company out in Val Caron. He's had a work van sitting in his equipment yard for 2 years with a busted alternator. I told him I needed to borrow it to move some hockey gear. He said sure and didn't ask anything else. On a Thursday night in early October, I parked the van in the far end of the lot behind the gym and waited. Brody came out at 9:47, gym bag on his shoulder, phone in his hand, not paying attention to anything. I waited until he was between the building and his truck where no camera covered the angle. I said his name. He stopped, turned. When he recognized me, his jaw set in a way that I think was supposed to look like confidence. You're in violation of the bail conditions. I checked the conditions, I said. They restrict me from Maisie's school and my address, not public property. He told me to get out of his way. I want to talk about Sunday night, I said. He said he had nothing to say to me without his lawyer present. I pulled the stun gun out of my jacket pocket. Ronnie doesn't know I borrowed it from his glove box. I'd put it back before he noticed. What followed was quick. He ran. I was faster. 20 years of loading and unloading freight keeps you capable in ways a gym membership doesn't, because you're doing the actual weight rather than the chosen weight. I caught him at the corner of the building and he went down. I want to be clear about what I did next because clarity matters to me, even now, even knowing what it cost. I put Brody in the van. I zip-tied his wrists. I drove 40 minutes north, past Wanapite, to a property that belonged to a man named Desjardins, who'd sold it to the municipality 3 years earlier and whose outbuildings sat empty. I knew the property because I'd hauled Desjardins' household goods to his daughter's place in Timmins when he moved. There was an old root cellar behind the main building. Concrete walls, wood plank door, metal latch, roughly the same footprint as Elise's backyard shed. I put Brody in it with a 2-liter bottle of water, about a third full, a granola bar, a bucket, more than Maisie had. It was 7 degrees outside. The same temperature it had been the night Maisie spent in that metal shed on a concrete floor with a wet blanket. I told Brody exactly what I was doing and why. I told him that he would be in that room for 43 hours, because that was how long Maisie had been in his shed. I told him that every few hours I would return and tell him what time it was and what Maisie had been doing at that point during her confinement. I told him that if he cooperated, he would get out at the end of 43 hours, and that if he didn't, I would take my time. He told me I was insane. Hour 6, I came back and opened the outer latch slightly and spoke through the gap. Hour 6, I said. Maisie had stopped knocking. Her knuckles were too swollen. She had started talking to Mr. Pickles through the walls, telling him she'd be out soon. Hour 12, he was still angry, demanding. Said he'd have me charged. I told him what Maisie had been doing at hour 12, which the hospital assessment helped me reconstruct. Mild hypothermia symptoms beginning. Maisie had taken the fleece blanket and wrapped it around her feet because she'd understood on some level that her feet were the most important thing to keep warm. She's 11 years old and she understood that. Think about that. Hour 18. He'd gotten quieter. When I opened the latch, I heard him breathing in the way people breathe when they've been crying and don't want to show it. Hour 18, I told him. Maisie had started asking why. Not asking to be let out. She'd stopped that. She was asking why. Why was this happening? What had she done? She's told her therapist about this part, and the therapist told me later that children who transition from requests to self-interrogation during a trauma like this are showing signs of internalized shame. They have started, in other words, to believe they deserve it. That detail is the one that gets me in the middle of the night. Hour 24, the halfway point. When I opened the latch, Brody said, please. Just please, nothing else. One word. Maisie at hour 24 had been trying to recall the multiplication tables, she told me later. She'd been practicing them in her head to keep her mind occupied. She'd gotten stuck at 8 times 7 because she'd always had trouble with that one. She'd cycled through it over and over. 8 times 7 is 56, I said to Brody through the latch. That's what she was thinking about. He didn't say anything. Hour 30, I'd placed my phone inside the root cellar, tucked behind a shelf support, with a voice recorder running. He didn't know. In the hours I wasn't present, he talked to himself. People do. It turned out to be the most important thing I did. Hour 36, he was bargaining, offering things. He'd plead guilty. He'd drop the bail restrictions so I could see Maisie more. He'd leave Sudbury, leave Ontario. He'd never come near us again. I told him that at hour 36, Maisie had been trying to remember what the sky looked like. She'd been in the shed long enough that she was no longer sure she remembered the specific color of it. She kept second-guessing herself. Hour 40. Brody was crying. Not performing, actually crying. He said he understood. He said he'd been wrong. He said that his own father had done something similar to him when he was young, and that he'd thought it was just what you did when a child needed to learn. Unexpected anger from him. I hadn't expected that. It didn't change anything. Understanding where a thing comes from isn't the same as excusing it, but it explained the confidence, the absolute certainty that he was right. He'd been on the receiving end of this and concluded that it had worked. Hour 43, I opened the door. Brody was in the corner. He'd soiled himself. He could barely stand. The water was gone, but the granola bar was untouched. At some point, survival instinct had stopped being relevant. I retrieved my phone from behind the shelf. I said nothing to him. I cut the zip ties, helped him to his feet, and walked him to the van. I drove him to the emergency entrance of Health Sciences North and let him out at the curb. He didn't say a word. I drove away, the recording. 30-plus hours of a man alone in a dark room with his conscience. The first 12 were rage and threats. Then came the bargaining. Then, in the small hours of the second night, came the confessions. He talked about locking Maisie in before. twice while I'd been on long runs for shorter stretches that Elise had passed off as something else when I'd noticed Maisie was quiet on our calls. He talked about killing Mr. Pickles. That turned out to be premature. The cat was found alive in the basement, dehydrated and unhappy but alive, but he'd planned to claim the cat had escaped. He talked about what he believed about children and discipline and weakness in a way that made it clear this was a philosophy he'd developed over time, not an accident. His defense lawyer later argued the recording was inadmissible because it was obtained through unlawful confinement. The Crown prosecutor argued that Brody had confessed voluntarily to himself, without any coercion or interrogation present at the time. The judge ruled that the sections of the recording captured when Brody was alone were admissible. The sections captured during my hourly check-ins were excluded. Brody's lawyer tried 3 more motions. They were all denied. He pleaded guilty to criminal negligence causing bodily harm, child endangerment, and 1 count of willful cruelty to an animal. Mr. Pickles recovered fully, but the intent was documented. He received 7 years at a federal institution. No conditional sentence. No community service alternative. 7 years. I was in the courthouse for the sentencing. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there and felt something go out of me that had been burning for 6 months, and I was tired in a way I don't have words for. The police investigated the incident involving Brody's hospitalization. An officer came to see me, a staff sergeant named Tremblay, who sat across from me in my kitchen with a coffee, and asked me some questions and looked at me carefully for a while. Before he left, he said, "Sometimes things have a way of working themselves out." He didn't push further. I've thought about that a lot. I don't know whether he knew. I don't know whether he chose not to know. Elise did not face criminal charges, which I found difficult to accept. Child protection law in Ontario draws a distinction between inflicting harm and failing to prevent it, and Elise's lawyer argued that her alcoholism constituted a diminished capacity to act. She was ordered into a residential treatment program, 60 days inpatient at a facility near Huntsville, followed by ongoing outpatient counseling as a condition of any future access to Maisie. I don't know if she'll follow through. I've been wrong before about what people will do. What I do know is that she has not had a drink in 7 months. I know because Maisie's therapist keeps me informed, and because Maisie told me herself the week before Christmas that her mom had called to say she missed her. Maisie didn't know what to do with that. We talked about it for a long time at the kitchen table after dinner, with Mr. Pickles asleep on the radiator. I told her that she didn't have to do anything with it until she was ready, and that ready might take a year or 10 years or forever, and that all of those were acceptable. I have full custody now. Maisie's therapist is a woman named Dr. Fogarty, who works out of a clinic on Elm Street, twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday. For the first 2 months, Maisie barely spoke in the sessions, Dr. Fogarty told me. She sat and colored, and sometimes she cried and sometimes she didn't. By month 3, she was talking. By month 5, she asked Dr. Fogarty a question that Dr. Fogarty repeated to me afterward because she thought I should know. She asked whether what happened to her was her fault. Dr. Fogarty told her no. She asked how Dr. Fogarty could be sure. Dr. Fogarty said, "Because nothing a child does earns them a dark room. That is not how people work. That is not how love works." Maisie thought about this. Then she said my dad came home early. Dr. Fogarty told me that she'd said it the way other kids say their dad once scored a goal or once fixed a bicycle in the rain, like it was the most natural defining fact in the world. I see my own therapist now. His name is Mr. Bisson, and he works out of an office above a pharmacy on Notre Dame Avenue. He used to work with firefighters and paramedics, and he is not easily shocked. When I told him what I'd done, not all of it, but enough, he sat with it for a long time before he said anything. Then he said, "You're carrying what people in trauma work call a moral injury. You violated your own code in order to protect someone. That kind of thing doesn't resolve with logic. It sits in the body." I asked him if I should feel guilty. He said guilt and accountability aren't the same thing, and that I probably knew the difference without needing him to explain it. He was right about that. There was a civil case, briefly. Brody's parents threatened an action through their son's lawyer. Nothing came of it. I think Brody's lawyer looked at what the recording contained and advised the family to let it go. Maisie is in grade 6 now. Her teacher says she's one of the most focused readers in the class, which doesn't surprise me. She started a book club with 2 girls from her street. They meet in our kitchen on Saturday mornings and eat too many crackers and argue about whatever they're reading. Mr. Pickles presides from the counter and periodically knocks things onto the floor. She still has hard nights sometimes. She wakes up and comes to my room, and we watch old episodes of a nature documentary she likes until she falls back asleep. I don't mind. I spent enough nights away on that highway that I'm still grateful for every night I'm home. A few weeks ago, she was doing homework at the kitchen table, and she looked up out of nowhere and said, "Dad, did you do something to Brody before he went to prison?" Kids understand more than we account for. I put down what I was holding and I sat across from her. I told her, I made sure he understood what he did to you. I made sure he wouldn't forget it. She looked at me for a long time with that evaluating look she has, the one she was born with, the one that means she's deciding whether the answer she just received was the true one. Then she nodded. Then she went back to her homework. I'm writing this because I spent a long time believing that the system would handle things, that it was designed for exactly this, that my job was to stay calm and trust the process. The system did eventually do its job, but it did it slowly, and while it moved slowly, Brody was out on bail, filing motions and uploading videos about discipline, and my daughter was in twice-weekly therapy, trying to remember that dark rooms are not what she deserved. I'm not telling you to do what I did. I mean that. What I did carries costs I'm still paying, and I don't know yet what the final number is. But I am telling you to pay attention. I am telling you that men who speak in philosophies about children and weakness and discipline are telling you exactly who they are. I am telling you that a child who goes quiet is not a child who is fine. I came home 2 days early on a route that should have taken me to Friday. There's no version of this story where I don't. I think about that sometimes. The jackknife truck on the 17, the Transport Canada closure, the dispatcher who rerouted me home, all of it landing exactly the way it had to land, on exactly the right Tuesday. Maisie asked me once if I believed things happen for a reason. I told her I believed that sometimes things happen at the right time. She thought about this. Then she said, "Like you coming home?" "Yes," I said. "Exactly like that." I held her then, and I didn't say anything else because there was nothing else to say. You can lose a piece of yourself doing what has to be done, and you can grieve that piece, and you can still know, without any ambiguity at all, that you would do it again. That the piece you lost is worth infinitely less than the girl who asked you that question. I came home early. I found her. And whatever I am now, whatever I cost myself that October night on that frozen road north of Wanapatai, I am still her father. That part didn't change. That part will never change.